really excited to be joined by Candace MacGibbon. We're going to have Alicia Hyatt, editor of Canadian Mining Journal, conduct this interview. This one's great, so topical. I mean, Candace has a fantastic career in the mining industry, so much respect around her. Her performance, the INV metals, which she was the CEO of, M&A, such a big topic these days. Candace was able to guide it to a 63% premium. Dundee Precious Metals acquired it just in the summer, late spring, early summer of this year. Really all about their presence down in Ecuador. So fantastic stuff on that. It's their the Loma Larga is the project, but we're going to get more of that from Alicia. Let me introduce Alicia, and she'll introduce Candace, and we can get right into the meat of it. As I said, Alicia is editor-in-chief of Canadian Mining Journal. Canadian Mining Journal is part of our group of Northern Miner Group family of companies, and it's one of Canada's oldest mining publications. Alicia has nearly 15 years of experience as a mining journalist, covering projects and mines, new technology, and environmental and social issues related to mining. But you all know that because you all read CMJ and you see the great job that Alicia does month to month. She's also editor of Diamonds in Canada, which is a feature in the Northern Miner, which will be coming out. I believe we pushed it to the beginning of December this year. Alicia, welcome back to the Global Mining Symposium. Great to see you. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, Anthony. Great to see you too, and to be here. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this session. I think it's going to be really great.
Excellent. Well, you always do such a wonderful job moderating. Your experience always comes through. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you to introduce Candace, and we'll all sit back and listen. Thanks, Alicia.
Great. Thank you so much, Anthony. It is my pleasure to introduce Candace MacGibbon. Candace has 25 years of experience in the mining sector and capital markets and is a chartered professional accountant. She was most recently, as Anthony said, the CEO of INV Metals, which was acquired by Dundee Precious Metals in July of this year for its Loma Larga project in Ecuador. Candace's previous financial and accounting experience has included serving as CFO of INV and as a manager at Deloitte. She also has a deep understanding of the capital markets with previous experience at RBC and BMO Capital Markets. She is currently a director of Osisko Gold Royalties and has just been appointed a director of Carbon Streaming Corporation. Candace, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Morning, Alicia. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. Very excited. So I wanted to start off the conversation this morning by congratulating you on the acquisition of INV by Dundee in July.
Thank you.
And I got the feeling speaking to you about this last week that beyond any premium that you got for the asset, as Anthony mentioned, that you were really excited that Dundee was the acquirer. So why is it so important to you that Loma Larga is in good hands? And why do you think that Dundee is the right company to advance the asset?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the introduction, Alicia, and thanks to the Northern Miner for having us today, myself and my colleagues. And thank you for all of those out there who are listening. And so hopefully you find the next few minutes interesting. In any case, how we were able to move the project right through from acquisition through to the up the chain and through another acquisition, but from a sale from our perspective. And I would say the intention, just to be clear, was never for us to sell this asset. It wasn't, we were not moving it forward to just to tick the boxes in order for sale. And those of the investors and at every conference that I spoke to, we were moving forward with building this. But there are two options. Either you build it or you sell it. And so at this point in time, it was an opportunity that we must and were decided from a board perspective to show to the shareholders, and they overwhelmingly approved it. So that was the course of action that we took. And I will tell you why, back to your question as to Dundee Precious Metals being one of the natural fit for the acquisition. And we were very lucky at INV to have two operating shareholders as partners, and they were Dundee Precious Metals, who owned just over 20%, and IM Gold, who we acquired the project from, who owned just shy of 36%, both of whom were so supportive over the years. And the natural conclusion as far as Dundee Precious Metals goes, and it is fourfold. First being, they have the the Chelopech mine, which is a high sulfidation gold, copper, silver mine in Bulgaria. And the Loma Larga project is very much an analog to that. And so they can bring their technical development and operating experience with regards to the project. And a little bit later, we'll talk about what they're doing with it now, which is indeed just that. And secondly, they also sell concentrate, and they have a dual stage flotation circuit at Chelopech, which we were contemplating. And so they've got a big in-depth experience on the technical side. On the processing side, they also own a smelter in Namibia in Sumab, which they can process some of the concentrate. And so that's helpful. The other issue that is relevant is the fact that they have just completed, well, not just, COVID sort of gets in the way of the months are passing, but they completed successfully the construction of an open pit mine in Bulgaria at Tepe. And that was using the Natura 2000 restraints of the European Union, which is extremely biodiverse and strict as far as framework goes with construction. And so they have experience in biologically diverse areas using criteria which are quite stringent, which of course Ecuador, everyone knows or can appreciate, is one of the most biologically diverse countries in the world, and they're very proud of that. And then lastly, I would say those two mines that I mentioned were developed by the team in Bulgaria in areas that have historically had anti-mining sentiment. And so them being able to change that and have the experience, actually it's not the last because something just popped into my mind, but that experience is going to be helpful for them. And the sort of the most important one from their perspective is they're fully financed to build it. And so the money they won't have to finance. And so for all those reasons, it was a good fit. And so I'm pleased that the team, the community, the government, because this was my life for 10 years, and my passion for 10 years is going to be developed. That was very important to the board and the management team with who we were looking to speak to when we were talking about acquisition.
So you just mentioned that well, you started off by saying that INV intended to develop the project. So how, as a junior, what was kind of your plan? I'm just curious, what was your plan? This is not the most easy jurisdiction. It's relatively new for big mines, for modern mining. So
yeah, absolutely. So look, I will be on record saying there is no easy jurisdiction to build a mine in the world anymore. So, and like, let's get that on the table. But beyond that, we would have been able to, were we moving forward to build a mine, had the cards been dealt that way. We had assembled a board and technical team of builders and operators. And so we had the advisors in place, and we had pulled Bill Shaver, who lots of you know on this call, out from retirement, who was going to lead as our COO the build. And so he's one of the most foremost mine builders and contractors in Canada, and has built many and consulted on many a project. And so we were building the team. We were in the midst of financing. We were in the midst of permitting. And so the issue with single asset companies, and this is what every management team comes to and board comes to, is that the length of time it takes to permit and the length and the financing required has to be weighed against the dilution to the shareholders as you move forward. And so we were presented with an offer from our very supportive shareholder, who we knew had the resources, the technical competency, and showed it to the shareholders as you do with your governance, and the shareholders overwhelmingly approved it. And including IAMGOLD, who also understands that the asset now is in good hands and has the technical expertise that DPM has to move it forward. And so it was a good result for the shareholders, and it was a good result for the project and our employees down there, and ultimately the communities, which we'd spent so much time developing and fostering our relationships to. So that really is the why we didn't have an opportunity to, but it's in good hands.
Let's talk a little bit about your experience in Ecuador. I know you acquired the project Loma Larga in 2012 from IAMGOLD. And I want to talk a little bit about the anti-mining sentiment there in Ecuador. We all hear about this in Ecuador. And I know there were a couple of referendums in the Cuenca area near Loma Larga rejecting mining. But what was your experience in terms of sentiment on the ground?
Sure. Okay. So I'm just going to give a quick, for those people who don't know the history, I'll give a quick history and then I'll layer on the nuances of all of the sentiment. And so we acquired it in 2012 from IAMGOLD for shares. It was contemplated and they remained a significant shareholder because they believed in it. And I can't say enough about both management teams from IAMGOLD and DPM as far as their support. And IAMGOLD, when they had it, it just became non-core because it was in Ecuador, and Ecuador was going through some trouble as far as what was the sentiment of the day with regards to the mining law. So in 2008, when Correa had taken over, he had sort of put a moratorium on mine, Kinross, and clearly was ultimately sold the Fruta del Norte to Lundin Gold, and there was some issues. And so we were looking at our strategy at the time, wanting to move from an exploration company focused into a development focus. And this asset was fantastic. And otherwise, if it wasn't located in Ecuador, we wouldn't have had exposure to it. And so for an all-share deal, we brought this in, knowing that even though IAMGOLD had contemplated a pressure oxidation, so a bulk concentrator pressure oxidation in a CIL plant to produce doré, that we wouldn't do that we would redo the technical aspects and look to sell concentrate, which wasn't all that popular at the time, but has become much more mainstream, which is good. And so really it wasn't until Dundee Precious Metals bought in and we did our marketing study that showed that this concentrate is indeed saleable, that the investor base really believed that we're going to be, and that business model is quite sound. And so we did all the test work to support. We did 2 pre-feasibility studies, one at a medium scale, hoping that maybe we would fit into the no large scale permits. And then when things really changed, the tides turned, the Correa became supportive and successive governments were very supportive of mining. We went full throttle towards the feasibility study to produce the 3,000 tons per day and over 200,000 ounces of gold equivalents per year. And it's predominantly a gold mine. So that's a reasonable size mine and would add to anybody's bottom line as far as production goes. And so when we were in the midst of the permitting and financing, we were working with the Ministry of Mines, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Production to move all of this forward. So regardless of all these referendums that were layered on top of us, we were pushing forward. And apart from the first referendum, which was in all these referendums, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, were very politically motivated for personal gain. And so in certain circumstances, they were quite successful in those actors becoming popular as a result of these things. So one of the things we worked very hard at was saying, look, so there's a legal framework here, and regardless of what happens in the local area, you're going to have to apply the law and all of the concessions now in Ecuador with historic investments. I mean, we had $70 million of US historic investment. That is a significant investment. You can't just wipe that out with, oh, by the way, we don't want this anymore. And so we were moving forward. There was about a year, I would say, where we were delayed on the application until we got the retroactive decision. And so we were about, I would say, a year. And so we're moving forward with financing, moving forward. And so from a government perspective, our experience has always been wonderful and favorable and supportive. And from a community perspective, it's been the same. And so where typically you may come into issues when you're a developer is in other communities sort of further away who don't have the relationship that you do. And this, in my opinion, can really be overcome with communication. And this is what a larger company has a budget for. And unfortunately, we don't always have, as juniors, the funds. We're awfully lean as far as our budget goes in order to do that. And so I'm very pleased to report that in the Dundee Precious Metals report, their results report, David's quote is saying, and I'm going to read it here with regards to Loma Larga, that we are very encouraged by the progress being made since closing and the government support we're receiving in Ecuador. And so that marries with the experience we have. And so on the ground, it's a bit nuanced. Where the success will come is from communication, transparency, and all of those sorts of things with with all of the permitting activities that need to come. And so I must say, apart from me, I don't think anyone except for the members of the Constitutional Court are as experienced with regards to the mechanisms about referendums in that country. And I will be doing due diligence to ensure that there is no referendum in any law in any country that I will be working in the future. I will say that.
Thank you for making that clear.
Just FYI, yeah.
So just wanted to get your impression, now that new mines are large, modern new mines are being developed in Ecuador, some by Chinese operators, some by Western companies. Do you think mining is becoming more or less acceptable there? Now speaking just as an observer, I guess.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Look, I think that Lundin Gold's Fruta Norte and the Chinese-owned Mirador coming on stream when they did, I was sort of late 2019, and then of course we've had some issues. Sorry about the flickering. I'm not sure what's happening if you're seeing that, but
we can still hear you fine.
Yeah, okay. So sorry about that. In any case, so I think that that's had a very positive impact on two things. One being the community understanding that there are some significant employment opportunities and production opportunities and supply chain opportunities, which is fantastic. But two, in order to have a federal government that's supportive of mining, you have to show them that they're going to get the tax revenues that all of this billion-dollar estimates actually have been on their spreadsheets. And so when they get that first check in the mail and it's tax and it's significant, that then allows people who may have been not as supportive to say, oh, this is a significant driver, assuming we do it right, of future GDP growth and a revenue tax base. And so I think that's been very helpful. I think with the consistent communication the industry still has to do, we still have to spend the money and the time to get people who don't understand what mining is to understand what mining is, and really focus on the benefits and the impacts, because it's not all good there, and then work together with the communities to overcome those such that you still have that relationship that's built with trust. And as I was saying, our budgets are so lean. So it's nice when you have an operating partner who understands that communication is a key budget line. The issue is, and will be, especially as we move forward with exploration companies that are going to be required to do this, where is the money going to come from? So that will be one of the challenges that we have as we move forward.
And incidentally, that challenge isn't just in Ecuador. And I think you alluded to that earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
So switching gears a little bit here, I wanted to talk a little bit about the M&A landscape overall, seeing as you've got some pretty deep expertise in the capital markets. How do you see the gold sector shaping up next year in terms of M&A? Do you think we'll continue to see no premium deals? Do you think that there's appetite for more big deals?
I think both. So loaded question, and a bit of a loaded question, and it's definitely an interesting one. I was so pleased and congratulate both Lakeshore Gold and Agnico Eagle on the transaction that was announced late September, and they're going to their shareholder votes next week. I'm thrilled we're going to have a Canadian powerhouse. I think we need that. Our reputations abroad are well deserved, and to be able to keep that and build that is awesome. Taking a lesson from the Gold Corp Newmont, it may be a few months before those that were hoping to be acquired by either one of Agnico or Lakeshore get into that groove, given they're going to possibly, I'm not on either company, but looking to integrate over the next few months and on building a strategy and what those strategies are and what they're going to be doing. So while I believe that they will have the capital and of course will look to grow, there might just be a little bit of a time lag with regards to that. Anecdotally, the mining investment bankers are very busy. So that means that people are talking to each other and they're looking at either mergers and of equals, which probably implies closer to no premium deals. It's easier to sell a no premium deal a merger of equals when there's no premium, then there's not sort of an implied or a hidden acquirer versus acquiree. And so that may be the trend, certainly at the big cap, I think. And clearly people are also looking at asset purchases. And I think from that perspective, then we've got a lot more room for premiums. And so from
The differential is I think that development assets are historically undervalued at this point compared to comparables over the years, and for various reasons. And of course, it's only going to get more expensive with cost inflation and with labor shortages to build these mines. So there may be a little bit more of a devaluation, but then the premium on the stock price becomes really important for shareholders and for management teams to be able to support the acquisition. And so the premium for shares might be high. However, the price to NAV ratio could be on the low side of the comparables. I think that will likely and could likely be a trend in the future, which is fine for shareholders. Of course, they want to make their money, and that's what will enable the boards and the bankers to be able to have that fairness opinion, which is required because you have to be able to get both of those things on side in order to be able to recommend it for sale. So I think that we're good. I think that each asset will be priced nuanced by jurisdiction for political risk, for financing risk, and all of those things that are key now to moving forward.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about the impact of ESG factors on M&A? You know, we've got companies that have made commitments to move towards net zero carbon emissions by 2050. We've got social license being more important than ever in terms of advancing projects. So how is that shaping the way that assets are valued and the type of M&A, the amount of M&A we're going to see going forward?
So I think this is an interesting question, and the valuation thing is quite interesting as well. Let's bring it back to fundamentals, because I think without strong ESG, you won't even be a candidate for M&A activity, nor will you be a candidate for bank financing or equity financing. So the trend moving towards investment funds that have to have the boxes ticked with regards to carbon neutral or a plan, ESG strong sustainability report, and all of those things will by necessity mean that without a strong ESG component to any mining asset, you won't be a candidate. And so it's time to step up. And what I was talking about earlier is how early in the cycle do you have to do that? You have to go in as an exploration company. You don't even know if you have anything that's economic. And yet then you have to have a strong ESG component. So it's going to get way more expensive to be an exploration company, and investors are going to have to realize that. And so I think that if you're looking for a new gig, anybody out there, the compliance for ESG and reports is a good one, because we're going to have to be able to audit what companies say the impacts, the positive impacts are. I think the trend is going that way, especially as we move into the carbon neutral footprint and we start to sell these credits and these benefits to others in order to offset. So it's going to be a very interesting field moving forward.
And one more question about M&A. Is the pandemic still hampering the whole deal making process?
I think it definitely slowed it down. I think anybody who wanted to get a transaction done during the pandemic, potentially you needed to already have that relationship. So for our Dundee was on the board, they were a shareholder, they'd been to site and all of those sorts of things. So it was an easy, you didn't have to do necessarily your typical site visit. So that helps. August restrictions lifting definitely help as well. So if you need to, management teams can indeed, and the vaccine rollout here can move. I think in 2022, companies are just going to have to get back to executing their strategy. And so people are going to have to put aside the small risks of travel, and you're going to have to do that. So I think no one's going to want to do that before Christmas. People are going to want to put their feet up, and as we know, but maybe January, you'll see people on planes a little bit more. You might meet in the lounge more so than you would have seen them typically. So I think 2022 will be a much more back to normal year.
And you're a director of Osisko Gold Royalties. You touched on cost inflation and labor shortages earlier. So what are your thoughts on the investment thesis around royalties versus developers and producers, especially at this moment in time?
Okay, so I'm not choosing between my children. I'm just going to talk about the time difference, because you got to love all your children. So I won't play favorites, but I think each and all is a good opportunity and a long-term investment thesis. And so I love working with the team at Osisko Gold Royalties with Sean Roosen as the exec chair and Sandeep Singh as the CEO. And I think in the near term, with gold prices being strong and metal prices being strong, they're going to rise to the top of the investment thesis in the near term. And so assuming that gold prices stay high and we get our historic strength into January, it's a good short-term investment thesis. And of course, they don't have the exposure to the cost increases that we as producers do. And as far as the government policies goes, I think that the juniors and the developers, in order to come back into light, and it's a bit of a personal beef I have here, is that the government policymakers don't quite understand what's required in order to switch to the carbon neutral economy. You're going to need metals to store, produce, and transmit clean energy. And without the policies to support mining, you're not going to be able to move to that economy in the time frame that they have and the aggressive targets that they have. So when those leaders, and we don't have to look further than North America, actually become a little bit woke to that concept and policies change, then I think we're going to have the developers in the sun. I think in the meantime, it'll be your typical head down, and the large mid cap guys will look to grow their pipeline and historically. But I hope that premiums, look, there's no doubt the prices are going up because there's going to be a supply crunch, that for sure, on the metals. And then the producers, the prices should be high. The question will be what happens to the inputs, and can we manage that? And then on the developers, let's hope there's a big push in the next couple of years, because we understand that the carbon neutral economy transition will need them.
Great answer. I think we're going to open it up to questions in just a little bit. I just have a couple more questions for you before we do that. One is about Carbon Streaming Corp. You've just become involved with that company as a director. So can you tell us a little bit about what they're doing?
Sure. Yeah, it's not really related to mining. It's very interesting. And I've been involved with the founders of Carbon Streaming Corp since 2017, when I was on the board of Cobalt 27, and it's Justin Cochran and Anthony Maluski. And really, they're first mover in this space, I would say, and carbon streaming. So I'm going to relate it to something that this group knows. So a streamer typically provides investment, money, financing, and has a contract to either acquire the metals or to have the financial instruments settled at a certain cost. And that's the whole concept with regards to carbon credits. And so the thesis here is that the world is going to go to requiring companies to be carbon neutral. Therefore, you're going to have to buy carbon credits in order to do that, because you can't not drive a car and have emissions, so to speak. And so we will, as a company, invest into projects that create carbon credits. We will be contractually bound to be able to receive those carbon credits, whether it be a percentage or a certain fixed number of carbon credits over a period of time. And then the thesis is they will appreciate in value, and then we will resell those in the market to get that price appreciation. And so interesting, fantastic way and innovation of an investment vehicle where retail investors can have access to a product that is providing a real impact on the world in a positive way, in an environmental and a social manner. So it's exciting. I think that the space is going to blow up. The voluntary market right now is about $500 million. I think in a couple of years, it'll be tens of billions of dollars. And so there's definitely, it's a space to watch.
Okay, thank you. And I just had one more question before we move on to the audience questions. You grew up in the mining business. Your dad is a very well-known geologist and mining entrepreneur, Terry McGibbon. He's a Canadian Mining Hall of Fame inductee. So what was the most important thing that you learned from him about the mining business?
Okay, so look, I think I can safely say that working with Terry working and learning from Terry has been the highlight of my career. And not too many people get to work with someone who's as well respected and as kind and as generous as Terry is. And I find that a lot of his peers are also generous with their time and energy. But Terry's, two things I can say that come to mind when you ask me this, apart from having the sheer pleasure of working with him, is that Terry always carries himself
and thinks people first. And so his mantra is to be compassionate and fair in all situations, whether that's a contract, an acquisition, all of those types of things. And if both parties come to the table as friends and leave as friends, then everyone's happy and everybody wins. And that's always the way he's conducted his business learnings. And so to watch that in action over his career, which has been a 30-year career at Inco, and then I'm not going to say the number, but quite a considerable time creating many, many companies and advising them on their boards. And then the last one, which I can leave, which applies to every industry, is that there's three things one needs in order to succeed. And it's the 3 Ps, he calls them: passion, perseverance, and patience. Now, in the mining business, any day they can be reordered. But in order to have the overnight success that is required in this business, which is of course 10, 15 years of hard work on an asset, if you have all of those things and you put yourself in the position to have a healthy dose of talent and a healthy dose of luck, of course, by luck, I mean you work really, really hard to put yourself into a position of lucky, then you may be able to have some success. And so he's quoted as saying that in many of his speeches, but I think that one is something to tell the kids.
Great. I hope everyone's listening out there. Anthony, do we have time for some questions from the audience?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Candace. Thank you, Alicia. And this is an excellent conversation. Anthony. Good morning, Candace. It's very nice to see you, if only virtually. We'll take it though, right?
Exactly.
Those are the cards we've been dealt. Listen, fantastic conversation. You've hit on some really big themes and opened up a lot of further investigation. One thing, Candace, I loved your comments there about the governments needing to kind of wake up about what decarbonization, electrification really means on the ground. Do you have, and you have firsthand experience. I could detect a little frustration in your voice that they're, in general, they're not waking up to these sorts of things. But has there been any countries in particular that are maybe leading the way a little bit, or at least showing a positive example?
Good question. Okay, so there are certain countries, I believe, now don't quote me on this, that have decided that the battery metals are okay. Now, this is all anecdotally.
Yeah.
And then, of course, except for nickel sulfides. Right. So, I mean, how can you have battery metals that are okay, except for nickel sulfide deposits? Right. So I think even though some policymakers are trying, or some industry veterans are trying to educate, I still think there's a huge education process which needs to happen. And I'm frustrated only because I hear it, and not because of my experience on the ground, but because if we're serious about it, there's some real supply issues we need to deal with. Real ones. This is real. You can't distribute wind power like in the air, So it's we're not there yet, Anthony. We're not there. Most developing countries, I think, are saying not in my backyard.
Yeah, there's a latent hypocrisy in that, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
On the carbon credits, really interesting venture. And Anthony Molesky is going to be on, I believe, tomorrow on the show. So that's a nice coincidence there. You mentioned, the thesis, obviously you wouldn't get into this unless you think that there's going to be a stronger market for these carbon credits, but can you get into some of the fundamentals behind that? Is that because they're going to be harder? Is that on the supply side of carbon credits or on the demand side, or both? What do you foresee happening there?
I think the price, okay, so look, I'm new to the industry too. So and I think unless you've been trading carbon credits for the past 15 years, there's not many out there that have a lot of experience to it. I think the demand side is going to be huge. And a good example of that is an airline alliance where they've committed to offsetting credits, I believe this is in Europe, that are greater than their baseline emissions. And so that alone creates a demand that is voluntary, but is big. And now the struggle will be finding projects to be able on the supply side, right? How do you do it? How do you verify that they're credits? And it takes the time, right? You can't just say, oh, by the way, you want a forest. You need the people to be able to, that are knowledgeable in creating the calculations to see how many credits that does deed do. Is it a yearly basis, et cetera? And so it'll take time for supply to catch up, and hopefully we will have supply, because that'll
save the planet, right? Ultimately, if we can go to a zero carbon footprint, a neutral one. But I think in the near term, the demand is going to very, very much outweigh the supply.
Okay. Excellent. Listen, fascinating talk. Again, to echo Alicia's comments, congratulations on guiding INV to where you guided it to, and couldn't agree more. It's nice to see it in the hands of Dundee Precious Metals. They know what they're doing on operations side. So that's got to feel good all around. Candace, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you'll join us again in the future. You've been a great guest to have on.
Anytime, Anthony. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day.
Candace.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.